What's up YouTube? I'm Vaughn and this is the Gear channel where we discuss collectibles, hobbies, compare games from tabletop to video games. In today's episode we are reviewing my Ogdoadic deck that came second place at the Cardbrawler tournament Tuesday night. Now I was very surprised that we came second place because we beat decks like Dragon Lynx, Eldritch, and even Prank Kids. But sadly the last round we lost to Prank Kids. But for a deck that I actually built like last minute and I put a bunch of cards together, it actually turned out really well. And if you guys want to copy that exact build, well, here it is. But for today's video, we actually made a better version with actually playing 40 cards main instead of 47 that we were playing. And it's much more consistent now. But on top of that, we are going to be explaining a few of their effects for a lot of players that are not too familiar with what the Ogdoadic monsters do, because during the tournament there was a lot of confusion on some of the effects being mandatory for your opponent to do and some of them are optional for your opponent to do. So we're definitely going to be explaining some of those during the video. Now with that being said, let's get started. Okay guys, so here we have them. We're going to just do a quick Ogdoadic tutorial on where the main ones that people usually play, where the abilities, which ones the optional ones, and which ones are the mandatory for your opponent to perform. Now you could definitely skip this tutorial and go straight to the deck list if you want. Not an issue. So first off, we have our two little main hand trap foolish, the ones that the light sends a dark Ogdoadic and then the dark sends a light. So they both have similar effects. While they're in your hand, you get to discard them to send a light or dark, the opposite of their attribute. Now, the second effect of the light though is that if you control no monsters or at least an Ogdoadic monster, you can special summon him from the graveyard. But it is banished if he leaves the field, and also while he remains face up on the field, you can only special summon reptile monsters. Now for the dark one, the second effect is if he is normal or special summon, you get to add one Ogdoadic spell or trap, which is very good because you could definitely add the Water Lily straight to your hand. Then we have Flogus and Zoa. Now both of their first effects are pretty similar. You could send a card from your hand to the graveyard as cost and add them from grave to hand. Now, the second effect, Flogus, is that if he's sent from the field to the graveyard or special summon from the graveyard, you get to target one of your opponent's monsters and one monster from their graveyard that has equal attack or more, and special summon it and then send the target on the field to the graveyard. So it pretty much switches out one of the monsters on your opponent's field with the one in the graveyard. Now, Zora has a mandatory effect for your opponent to perform, and that is if he is sent from the field to the graveyard or special summon from the graveyard, you get to have your opponent draw a card, discard a card, and you get to add a Ogdoadic monster and send a card from your hand to the graveyard. And that is not optional, so your opponent has to draw and then discard. So if they have no cards left in the deck and you use this effect, you just win because your opponent is now decked out. Now, we're going to go straight into the spell since it is in fact the only Ogdoadic spell that you really play, and that is Water Lily. Now, Water Lily has a foolish effect that you can send one reptile from your deck to the graveyard, but if you have 5 or more reptile monsters with different names in your graveyard, you get to special summon a reptile, which is definitely really good because it's also a foolish and a monster reborn, and it's very easy to get Overlord out with Water Lily because of it. Now, the light and the dark is the only ones that have optional effects for your opponent to perform. The light's effect is that you could tribute a monster, special summon him, and your opponent can special summon a monster from his graveyard, but that monster is special summoned with the effects negated. So at least the effects are negated, but your opponent has the option to special summon a monster from the graveyard. Now his second effect though is that if he's special summoned, you get to special summon a level 4 or lower Ogdoadic monster. So any of these guys you could get special summon, but also it's very interesting that it says level 4 or lower because there might be more Ogdoadic monsters coming out that could be level 1, 2, and even 3. Now for the dark one, his effect is that's also optional for your opponent to do, is you contribute a monster to special summon him, and your opponent can add one monster from his graveyard to his hand, and that is optional. So if they choose not to, it's completely fine. Now his second effect isn't as good though. The second effect is that when he is special summoned, you could target 2 of your banished monsters and at least one of them a reptile and put them back in your graveyard. Now the issue that I have with this one is that it has to be 2 monsters and one of them has to at least be a reptile. Now at least being a reptile, that's not so bad, but the fact that it has to be 2 monsters though and not up to 2, that's when it becomes debatable. Like most of the time you're going to use him just to spam with the XYZ with level 8s, but that's mostly just it. Now we have the king, which in my opinion is one of the best ones because he has the most brokenest effect, and also he was slightly errated for the TCG compared to the OCG. And that is, the first effect is you contribute 2 monsters, special summon him from the graveyard, which is fine. But the effect that got errated though, which is very interesting, is that if a monster on the field is sent to the graveyard, your opponent's graveyard, except during the damage step, you get to add a reptile, light or dark, from deck or graveyard. Now in the OCG, it was if the monster was sent to the graveyard by an effect. Now it's just if it's sent to your opponent's graveyard. So, which means if your opponent does linking or even synchroing or anything like that, you're going to get the effect and plus off it. Now his third effect that's really good though, is that whenever your opponent adds a card, except during the draw phase, you get to discard a random card from your opponent's hand. Now each of these effects are hard once per turn, but the thing is that if your opponent adds cards from grave or from field, doesn't matter from where, if a card is added to your opponent's hand, you discard a random card. It is very good. And then we have the queen, which is also a level 8 as well. And the queen is very good as well, and is the one that is able to actually special summon Overlord very easily, like Water Lily. So the queen's first effect is tribute 2 monsters, special summon it from the graveyard. The second effect is if your opponent special summons a monster from the graveyard, you get to send 1 card on the field to the graveyard, and it doesn't even have to be a monster. If your opponent has spells or trap, you can send a spell or trap to the graveyard and it sends, doesn't even destroy. It's amazing. And then finally, the third effect, what brings out Overlord Dragon, is that if a monster is sent from your opponent's hand or deck, you get to special summon 1 light or dark reptile, which is ridiculous. If they play Foolish Burial that sends a monster from their deck to the graveyard, you get to special summon Overlord. If they play a hand trap, you get to special summon Overlord. This card is actually really good. And lastly, we have the Overlord, which has 2 effects, and it's quite simple. The first one is tribute 3 monsters to special summon from the graveyard. You don't usually special summon him that way. It's very rare that you do so. But the second effect, which is very interesting, is once while face up on the field, quick effect, you can send all monsters on the field to the graveyard that was not special summoned from the graveyard. And you're going to do that effect once per turn. Now, there are some restrictions, is that once while face up. So that means like, yes, you have to send it to the graveyard, bring it back from the graveyard, and then use the effect again. But also it has the once per turn as well. So even though if you use the effect first and then send it and bring it back, you still cannot do it because it's a hard once per turn for that effect. So that is the only thing I dislike about it, but still sending everything that was not supposed to summon from the graveyard is very good. And that's all the card text of the Ogdoadic monster in the deck. Now let's get into the deck profile. And here is our Ogdoadic deck, and as you can see, we are playing 40 cards in main, 15 in extra deck, and 15 inside. So let's start with the main deck. So obviously, as you can see, we have 3 Alistairs. Now, this card, honestly, with the Ogdoadic, at first I was like a bit iffy, but you know what? It's not that bad. It's actually pretty decent. It's very easy to get Macabre out with this deck, so definitely is good. But a card that is very good with Alistair is actually Kage to Kage. Now, if you're not familiar with this monster, when you normal summon a level 4 monster like Alistair, you get to spell summon Kage from your hand, so it actually chain blocks your opponent. So if you normal summon Alistair, Alistair is going to be chain link 1. Kage is also a trigger effect, so it's going to be chain link 2. So no matter what, your opponent cannot Ash Blossom a Alistair. And also it's searchable with King Pharaoh Imp, so it's very most likely that you could actually do a lot of comboing off before your normal summoning, add Kage, and then special summon him. And also it's easy to make even cards like Abyss Dweller with Kage as well, and even linking. So the only exception that you can't do is synchroing, using it as a synchro material. Now for hand traps, we do have 2 Droll and Lockbird, because this build is a very going second deck. So 2 Droll and Lockbird is perfect. Now I know like we should be playing 3, but at the same time there's no space. We're trying to stick it at 40 cards, and putting Droll at 2 so far has been the best option for this. And then we have 2 Nibiru's as well. Same reason for going second, helps a lot. Also, I never liked the idea of playing 3 Nibiru's. For me, I think 2 Nibiru's is perfect enough. Now for the Ogdoadic, we have 2 Nunus, 2 Nayas, 1 Floggo, 1 Zoa, 1 Light, 1 Dark, 1 King, 1 Queen, and 1 Overlord. And finally, the last reptile we have is 1 Light Serpent. Now, Light Serpent is an amazing monster. It is a light reptile, and if you're not familiar with this card, it's literally, if it's sent from your hand to the graveyard, like a lot of these cards does, you get to spell summon it. And the only restriction it has is that he cannot be used as a synchro material. Now, it doesn't even matter what Ogdoadic build you are playing. This card is amazing. You play at least 1 or 2. It's easy to search it. It's easy to add it even from grave to hand. There's even like a point that I even played 3 of these in a different build, and I was able to summon this guy 4 times in 1 turn. This monster is amazing, and everyone should be at least playing 1. There's a lot of combos you could do with Light Serpent. Now let's get to the spells. So we have 3 Snake Rains, because obviously it is a broken card. If we're drawing into it, it's amazing. If we draw it with Light Serpent and we send Light Serpent as cost, well, you get a special summon on top of sending 4 reptile monsters. Next, we have 3 Magical Meltdown because of the Invoke engine. But now we're going into more cards as for going second, and we have 3 Lightning Storms, which is amazing for going second. But also a card that is really good at going second or first is 2 Triple Tactic Talents. Now this card is definitely really good, especially if you have AA Zeus in your extra deck, because you can take your opponent's Trident or even their AA Zeus and overlay it. Then we have 2 Water Lilies. Now I always recommend Water Lilies to be at 2 or 1 because it is a hard once per turn and it is easy searchable. So it's only good like maybe if you start 1 and then another one to search, but it's not necessary to play 3 no matter what build you are playing. Then we have 2 Invocations for the Invoke, and then finally for the Trap we have 3 Evenly Matched for board wiping. So this with the Lightning Storms, this is all good, or even with the Nibiru's, this is just a good card to wipe your opponent's board. Because the whole point of it is like, you can't make that great boards. So a few negations, why not? But not really meant for going first. So going second, wiping your opponent's board, and then making a negation, that's decent. So that's what this whole deck focus on, is going second, wiping your opponent's board, and then making some negation so your opponent can't play. Now let's go into the extra deck though. We have 2 King of the Pharaoh Imps, 1 Abyss Dweller. Now for the level 8, we have 1 Sky Prison. Now Sky Prison, if you're not familiar with, it's an amazing card that it gains 100 attack and defense for every monster in either player's graveyard. So trust me, this guy can get pretty high. But that's not even the best part. His second effect is you can detach 1 material till the end of your opponent's turn, he cannot be destroyed by card effects, plus neither player can special summon from the graveyard. So if you play this against like Dragon Links, they cannot special summon from the graveyard. This stops a lot of plays, even other decks as well, but it is a very strong card. And for another rank 8 that we have is Titanic Galaxy. Now Titanic Galaxy is good because it does negate spells, but also a lot of times a lot of people forget the second effect. Now trust me, if you have Macabre and all that and your opponent wants to try to attack into it, to crash it, to kill it, and you have Galaxy as well, well guess what? Galaxy's effect is you could detach to redirect the attack towards him. So a lot of monsters that you don't want destroyed by battle, you can switch it to him, and he's a big boy. 3000 attack, 25 defense. So if he's in attack mode and your opponent is trying to get over your weak monsters, well guess what? You could just detach and redirect the attack. Now speaking of XYZs, our final one is AA Zeus. Now AA Zeus, well obviously we're playing it because we have a few XYZs, but also it's because we have triple tactics as well. So we have multiple ways of actually special summoning this guy. Some is with our monsters and some with our opponent's monsters as well. Next, we're going to the Link monsters. So we have the Almirage and the Secure Garna. Now I know some of you might be like, why don't I just play with the Magistus or wherever the Spellcaster is? It's like, you know what? It's not wrong. It does make room for the extra deck. But the thing about Secure Garna though, there's many times I left him on the field, and that's because of Prank Kids. If you have a Secure Garna on the field and they want to use that Lampsey's effect, trust me when I say that it doesn't matter what kind of chain blocking they do. This is a continuous effect and mandatory. So as soon as that Lampsey where it tried to inflict 500, it cannot, and it cannot special summon. So this thing actually stops a lot of Prank Kids play. So definitely recommend for people to start playing this because Prank Kids is getting up there at the moment. So this definitely stops them. Next, we have Barricade Blocker, which honestly, I use it just entirely if there's cards in my hand that I need to be sent to the graveyard so I can do more combos, definitely. But also another reason why I like him is that if you send Light Serpent to the graveyard and special summon him, Light Serpent is a reptile light, and he is a dark machine, which can make Alistair Invoker Madness. And let me tell you, this card you are going to abuse because his effect is not once per turn. So you could actually potentially summon multiple invoked monsters many times with this guy's effect. It's amazing. And also, if you are stuck in a position that you drew into Invocation, but you did not draw into Alistair or even Meltdown, you could definitely make Invoker and Madness very easily and use it as a material. So definitely really good. Then we have the Reptilian. Now Reptilian is usually good for against really big beaters in case you want to get rid of, but also it's that little, when you draw really bad, it actually does help in specific situations, and that little ad that gives you, even though it does restricts you on only reptiles, it does give you a slight advantage. So it's only for tight situations, but it definitely helps. Then we have Alien Shock Trooper. Now Alien Shock Trooper, honestly, this card is really good. Like I wasn't playing it at first and I regretted it, but honestly, this card makes sure that your opponent has to think twice of doing any kind of board wipes and everything. If they have a full field of monsters and all that, this is the card that could replenish your field, that could get everything back. It's a very strong card, and in many situations this card will save you a lot of the times. Now we're going to the fusion monsters, where we have 2 Invoked Macabres and then 1 Caliga. Now Caliga is very strong, especially for today's format. Summoning this does stop a lot of plays, but also Macabre has to be 2 because it's very easy to special summon Macabre, but that is the only options of Invoke I would really encourage to play. There might be some, but the extra deck is a bit too tight, and for this build it's just trying to make it a little bit better than the one that I played at the tournament. Now let's go to the side. So for the side, we have the 3 Artifact Lancias, because Tri-Brigade, definitely this card completely stops and cripples them. Then we have For going second, we have Forbidden Droplet. Now, technically, you could literally play even Dark Ruler No More at this point because they're both beneficial, and it doesn't really matter if you're sending like the Ogdoadic monsters to the graveyard, I guess, but also if they're in your hand, they have like resources as well to even send it. So you could definitely switch droplets for Dark Ruler No More. Then we have 3 Cosmic Cyclones because this format is starting to be very back row heavy, and there is a lot of decks that are relying on just small back rows, and these stuff definitely gets rid of it. Especially like decks like Prank It, you play Cosmic Cyclone on their Pandemonium while it's like set on the standby phase, they can't even chain it, nothing, and there you go, you just ruined the Battle Butler play. Then we have Harpy's Feather Duster, just in case if you go against heavy back row decks. Now for the traps, we have Skill Drain, Imperial Order, because these definitely shut down a lot of decks. And this is more for going first though, so just in case, because a lot of times your opponent will let you go first. Is the first round you want the dice roll, and then you let your opponent go first, then they know you're playing a go second deck, so they'll change it up. So these are definitely very helpful. And then finally we have 3 Ice Dragon Prisons, which you could definitely change. There's definitely other cards that you can consider to be even better. If you want to put that 3rd draw in Lockbird as well, there's definitely other alternatives that you could do, but this is one of like the proper choices compared to the other ones I had. And that's it for our Ogdoadic deck profile. Now, if you guys enjoyed today's video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe. And if you guys want a sneak peek of future products we're planning to review on this channel, you can follow me on my Instagram, VaughnGear. I'm Vaughn, and this was the Gear Channel.